The new, multi-billion-dollar command center was blind. A cyber attack had turned their digital maps into a flawless lie. As the eastbound passenger train and the westbound tanker train, laden with hazardous chemicals, sped towards each other on the same track, the massive screens in the command center glowed a serene green. All systems normal. Miles away, in a dusty, forgotten dispatch tower scheduled for demolition next week, an old man on his last day of work saw the truth. Not on a screen, but on an old analog panel on the wall, a panel that hadn't been trusted in decades. That panel was too old and too honest to be fooled by a digital lie. The old man reached for a rusted iron lever, knowing he was the last line of defense. The new command center was a cathedral of technology. Hundreds of screens, silently humming servers and sterilized air. The center's young and ambitious director, Corso, was proudly explaining the system to a group of journalists that morning. As you can see, everything is managed by AI. There is no room for human error. Just then, a call came through on Corso's private communication line. It was the head of security from a giant tech corporation, Cygnus Dynamics. "Corso?" The man's voice was distant. "We have an important passenger on the passenger train this morning, a whistleblower. I wanted to be sure that security protocols are at the highest level." "Don't worry," Corso replied. "Our system is flawless. Your passenger's as safe as they would be in their own home." Meanwhile, 200 kilometers away from that gleaming center, in the old dispatch tower, Elias Thorne was completing his final shift. His tower was an island forgotten by technology. The air inside smelled of old wood, warm machine oil, and ozone. The last rays of the sun, filtering through the dusty windows, illuminated the giant mechanical lever frame in the middle of the room, the thing Elias called the Iron Horse. Elias was performing his rituals, just as he had for 40 years. He closed his eyes and listened. He felt the vibration of the rails, that familiar rumble that traveled from the ground, through the wooden floor, and into his body. But in that moment, there was an anomaly in the vibration he felt. The rhythm was wrong. Very slight, but wrong. He opened his eyes and looked at the massive analog panel on the wall. This panel was directly connected to the physical circuits on the tracks. And on the panel, in an old maintenance siding that should have been empty, a small light was flickering erratically. The digital system, however, showed that line as completely empty and green. Elias picked up the receiver of the old Bakelite telephone and called the command center. A young operator, whose voice suggested he was in his 20s, answered. "Old tower calling," Elias said. "I'm getting a ghost signal on the 3B switch. Can you confirm that line?" The operator's voice was filled with the condescending patience one uses for an old man. "Sir," he said, "our digital map shows that line as completely clear. Please disregard." And the line went dead. For a moment, Elias froze. He looked at the paper map in front of him. He compared the routes of the two trains shown by the central system with the location of the ghost signal on his own panel, and the blood drained from his face. If that signal wasn't a malfunction, it could only mean one thing. The passenger train and the tanker train were on the same track, hurtling towards each other at full speed. Elias made the most important decision of his life. He walked over to the main circuit breaker that connected his tower to the central network and pulled the massive, rusted switch. With the sound of metal grinding against metal, his tower was severed from the modern world. As he went to the levers, his mind traveled back to the 1980s. As a young engineer, he had been part of the team that designed the new central system for the railway. Back then, his rival, the arrogant programmer Merrick, used to say, "The future is in code, Elias, not in rusty levers." Elias had warned him, "No system is unhackable, Merrick." There's always a human element you haven't accounted for. That argument had peaked on one of the most critical days of the project. In front of the board of directors, the young Elias and the young Merrick were presenting their security philosophies. Merrick filled the screens with bright graphics and flawless simulations. "Our system," he explained confidently, "has a self-correcting artificial intelligence that analyzes 1,000,000 variables per second. The probability of a failure is lower than the probability of an asteroid hitting this room." Then it was Elias's turn. Instead of a presentation screen, he showed an old, heavy mechanical railway relay he had brought on a wheeled table. "This," he said, knocking on the metal to produce a dull thud, "cannot be hacked. It cannot be fooled by bad data. It does only one thing. It completes a circuit with the physical weight of a train passing over it. This is reality, not code." The board members, impressed by Merrick's technological show, mocked Elias's old-fashioned presentation. A few weeks later, during the final test of the new digital system on a closed track, something unexpected happened. A slight magnetic fluctuation from a rare solar flare created a ghost signal on the sensors. Merrick's digital system, programmed for perfection, couldn't process this impossible data and froze for a moment. This short freeze nearly caused a simulated collision. At that time, the only person monitoring the test from an old tower with his own analog equipment was Elias. He instantly recognized the signal as an anomaly, manually overrode the system, and prevented the simulated disaster. However, Merrick saw this event not as a defeat, but as an opportunity. Humiliated, he blamed the anomaly on Elias's outdated analog interference and convinced the board of directors that the system had to be purely digital. Elias's mentor, the old master foreman, supported Elias, but he was overruled. That day, Elias's mentor told him, "They chose the easy lie over the hard truth." But remember, the iron will always be there. One day, it will be the only thing left to tell the truth. This event solidified Elias's distrust of digital systems and his unwavering faith in the iron. Now, in the present, Elias was engaged in a physical battle with the iron horse. The levers, unused for years, were rusted and stiff. Moving each one required incredible strength. His back ached, his muscles burned, but he worked with a desperate, focused energy. His goal was to redirect both trains to a forgotten, old maintenance line that had been erased from the maps. At the Central Command Center, Director Corso and his team still thought everything was fine, until their screens suddenly turned blood red. Dozens of proximity alarms, sensor errors, signal losses. The digital illusion had shattered. Corso panicked. "Call the trains, stop them." But it was too late. The trains had already passed the junction. In desperation, Corso checked the network status. A single node was offline, the old dispatch tower. He opened the tower's file. The name of the officer on duty, Elias Thorne. Corso cross-referenced this name with the original engineering team list, and his face went white. He understood what the old man had done. When the emergency crews arrived at the scene, they found the two trains safely stopped on the old maintenance line, just a few meters from each other. Then they went to the old tower. They found Elias collapsed over the lever frame, exhausted but alive. The investigation revealed a sophisticated cyber attack, and Elias was declared a national hero. But the story didn't end there. As the FBI traced the attack, they found that the malware had come from the servers of Cygnus Dynamics, and the important passenger on the passenger train was a whistleblower with documents that would prove Cygnus was selling illegal weapons, who was scheduled to testify against them. The crash was, in fact, an assassination attempt. When Cygnus Dynamics realized that their plan had failed, and that they were about to be exposed because of an old dispatch officer named Elias Thorne, they activated Plan B. Using another vulnerability in the network, they launched a new attack to remotely release the brakes of the stopped passenger train and crash it into a freight train waiting on another nearby track. Their goal was both to silence the whistleblower and to make the incident look like a chain of technical failures. The Central Command Center was thrown into complete chaos by this second, unexpected attack. The cyber attack was still ongoing, and they couldn't regain control of the network. They couldn't activate the train's brakes digitally. They had only one hope. Director Corso made the most difficult phone call of his life and dialed Elias Thorne's home number. "Mr. Thorne," Corso said, his voice desperate, "you have to help us. They're doing it again." From the quiet of his home, Elias was connected to the chaos in the center. Over the phone's speaker, he began to give instructions to Corso and his team to send old analog signals directly to the switches and brakes via the electrical grid, completely bypassing the digital systems. "Manually overload the relay on the 3B line," he said. "That will trigger the emergency hydraulic brake on 4C. It's a backdoor that Merrick forgot about." This was a security protocol that no one knew, that was only in the mind of the man who designed the system. The engineers in the center, following his instructions, fought against the monster they had created with the wisdom of its creator. After minutes of tension, the passenger train came to a screeching halt, meters from the other freight train. Elias had saved hundreds of lives for the second time. This time, not with rusty levers, but only with his voice and his knowledge. This second intervention brought an end to Cygnus Dynamics and his old rival Merrick, who was consulting for them. 1 year later. Months later, the echoes of the Cygnus case had faded. The whistleblower had started a new life with his family in the Witness Protection Program. Merrick was serving a long sentence in a federal prison, and Elias Thorne, declared a hero, had quickly retreated from the spotlight back into the silence of his retirement. But some stories continue long after the headlines disappear. Director Corso was no longer the arrogant technocrat he used to be. The helplessness he had experienced that day had changed him. He hadn't changed the name of the command center, but he had changed how it operated. One morning, he was giving a lesson to a group of young, enthusiastic dispatcher candidates. But he wasn't telling them about artificial intelligence, but about an old analog panel framed on the wall. "The screens were green," Corso said, his voice still trembling with the memory of that day. "Perfect, beautiful green lies. We were flying blind and didn't even know it." Then I heard his voice on the phone. The voice of an old man, calm as a river. He wasn't looking at a screen, he was listening to the iron. Never forget that. The iron has a memory that code does not. Meanwhile, Elias was at the old dispatch tower. The tower hadn't been demolished. Instead, it had been quietly taken over by the National Infrastructure Security Agency and turned into a think tank. Elias was no longer an officer but a consultant. Next to him was Maya, a young engineer in her 20s with eyes sparkling with intelligence. Elias was teaching her how to use the iron horse, how to listen to the sound of the rails. "But why, Mr. Thorne?" Maya asked one day. "Why are we bothering with this old technology when we have the new quantum network?" Elias looked out the window at the extending iron rails. "Because, Maya," he said, "every system has a language. The new systems speak in code, but this old iron speaks in physics, and physics cannot be hacked. We're building a Plan B here, a last resort, not just to protect the trains, but to protect the system itself." One day, an encrypted message arrived at the tower's terminal. The message was a warning about a potential cyber-physical attack targeting the country's electrical grid. This was the beginning of Elias's new quiet war. He was no longer just a railway hero. He was an invisible guardian, protecting the country's forgotten analog veins. After reading the message, Elias turned to Maya. "Lesson time is over," he said. "Now it's time for work." In his eyes was that old, focused gleam that hadn't been seen in years. Retirement was over. The watch was beginning again. While progress moved forward on digital tracks, everyone understood that day that wisdom runs on old iron rails, and that the most important backups are made not of code, but of experience and courage. And for some heroes, the last shift never really ends.